Welcome to the Retail Tech Podcast, where we talk about the full spectrum of technologies and implementation used in omnichannel and online retail. Make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at retailtechpodcast.com, and we always look forward to your feedback. Today I'm speaking with Rick Rommel, founder and president at RetailXelerator. How are you, Rick?
I'm fine, Darius. How are you?
Great. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, especially in this holiday season. Tell me, what is RetailXelerator?
Well, the Retail Accelerator is, you can think about it a number of ways, but at its most fundamental is it's a business accelerator focused on helping late-stage product companies crack the code that is retail. Recognizing that, our buddy Reid Hoffman has a great saying, something to the effect of, in any category, it's not the first company to market that wins, it's the first company to scale. So we're very focused on helping innovative new companies crack the code that is retail and frankly ready themselves for the rush that is taking themselves to market through mass retailers here in the US.
Okay, so that's a very interesting phrase. That you mentioned, crack the code that is retail. What exactly do you mean by that?
Well, let me turn it back around slightly different, right? When you ask retailers what they love, what they need to see in dealing, what they deal with in confronting the increasing number of startup companies that are showing up on their doorsteps, virtual or physical. They typically say two things. And the first is the obvious, which is they got to find the startup needle in the haystack. And that's because, as you well know, Darius, that there's more and more startups being formed every day for a whole bunch of reasons we can get into. But the second reason that they look to us is to crack what they call retail readiness. And what that really means is it's very different for a founder to start a company, get first article, and start to test with a limited number of customers, consumers, users, product market fit. It's a very different problem to scale up through retail. I mean, think about the branding, the packaging, the financing, the supply chains, the returns, the warranties, the call centers, all the competencies you have to have in place and be really darn good at. Otherwise, frankly, mass retail is either A, not gonna let you in the door, or B, if you get in the door and you fall over, that relationship's not going to last very long. So cracking the code's all about being ready for retail and then using retail channels to the maximum extent possible so that you as a startup can be successful.
Okay, so and that basically means to be ready to scale.
You bet.
Okay.
It's all about retail readiness and then knowing how to use retail to your best advantage, which is also not an obvious
right.
Companies.
Yeah, and I mean, another thing you mentioned, which is very important, is especially for founders and startups, is it really is not important who gets to the market first. What matters is that who can scale fastest. So I think that's an area where accelerators really can help.
I think that's true, and in fact, there's if you think about the accelerator landscape, Darius, there's a ton of ton of accelerators that help startups in the earliest phase of their life. In other words, your Y Combinator, your Techstars, your 500 startups. Local towns and cities have got startup accelerators. So there's a lot of infrastructure out there to help a couple of founders with an idea, with real estate, office space, initial funding, et cetera. But once you get past that stage, and a company's actually got something and they're ready to take it to market, what we found is, and I can get to how we found it, there's just no infrastructure in place to help them scale up. And you can argue that's where a lot of many very interesting, very innovative companies fail simply because they bounce against what it means to scale up their retail. And not getting that right means the company doesn't succeed and they're not that company that ends up scaling and being a category leader.
Okay. Yes, that makes perfect sense. So another interesting point that you made is the difference between accelerators. So there you could really categorize between an early stage accelerator and a later stage accelerator, which is what RetailXelerator is, correct?
Exactly right. In fact, when we started to crank this work up, I mean, it was based in part on my experience. I led the innovation and new business practice at Best Buy for about 4 years, and I became intimately familiar with the challenges that startup companies face in dealing with really big retailers. And 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 what you do is in that kind of a role, you look across the landscape at the accelerator community, and for the most part, they're all focused on the earliest stage founders. There's very little infrastructure for late stage, which is the reason why we put together the program we have.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is an important differentiating factor because most people, when they think about accelerators, is really the early stage ones where by the time you're ready for the demo day, that's really where you start to get some additional funding to get ready for the real world.
Right,
So,
right. And look, realistically, Darius, we have companies that have graduated, from a number of these early stage accelerators, and oftentimes these companies, they might be in existence for a couple, 3 years before they actually get, particularly in a hardware space, before they actually get a product that's actually suitable to scale up to retail. So you think about your typical, Y Combinator kind of a program, it lasts X amount of months and then you're kind of done with it. And there's a big gap between that accelerator's conclusion and the point where we pick them up and start to take them to market. And we're trying to bridge that gap as best we can. And we're doing it kind of retailer back. And in fact, when we started this work, we went to all of our retail partners, the Amazons, the Walmarts, the Targets, the Best Buys, the Searses, the Staples, et cetera. And we asked them what they wanted to see in a program so it was more of a pull model rather than a kind of a technology accelerator push model. And they came back with the two comments I opened with, which were, help us find the companies that are going to be relevant to us, and then make sure that when they get to us, they're as ready for that conversation as you can possibly make them. That's one of the reasons why, as a late stage accelerator, we offer what's effectively a graduate school for startup companies.
right. So you mentioned product companies. So there is the distinction there between an actual physical product as well as there are a lot of software tools also being made for retailers. Is that your focus is mostly on the actual physical product type companies?
Yeah, we have so far stayed to that space. And Darius, honestly, the answer is really simple, right? Hardware companies get less love. There's an old venture capital axiom that goes something effective that hardware is hard. And
Yes.
so we've been really on purpose about lining up support and partners and training to help those companies that build things get to market. And, you think about the difference in the go-to-market challenge is your typical SaaS company. It's a very different problem than a company that's building, I remember back in the days, I was at Best Buy, we brought Nest into Best Buy. And, the problems that a hardware company face from manufacturing, supply chain, branding, out-of-box experience, long-term support, a lot of those things simply don't exist as problems for a software company. And I think because of the lack of a program like ours, honestly, more companies that could have succeeded haven't. And I hope that what we're doing to some extent is giving kind of a booster shot to the late stage startup ecosystem. And we help more of those succeed in the market than would without us being there.
I agree. There is definitely a gap in that process, which I think you're filling. Which, at least to my knowledge, I haven't seen many other accelerators actually do that. So this is great. Now, in the process of a company going through this, their evolution, there are other new tools that they have available, especially if the company is going to go direct to consumer. For example, the crowdfunding, like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. What are your thoughts about those paths?
I guess I would think about all the crowdfunding, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Fundable. There's a number of them, right? And I think those are viable tools in the arsenal of kind of a go-to-market plan for a startup company. But they're also just steps. I mean, in many ways, the crowdfunding step has become a product market fit validation step for companies and for startups that sorted out how to use that kind of method usefully. I mean, there's a number of companies that probably have viable products that don't put together a very compelling crowdfunding program. It may not because the product's not compelling. It may because the marketing program's not compelling. Anyway, point being is crowdfunding has got its place in terms of validating product market fit and getting you some early sense of volumes. But bluntly, in our work, that tends to be a fairly really early in the life stage of what I call a scale-up company. I'll get back to that definition in a bit. What's really more challenging is, once you've got 1,000 people that have ordered your product on Indiegogo, what do you do next? And that's the real $64,000 question. And that means getting to the major retailers, either under your own brand or in many cases, given some of our team's background, mine in particular, we're strong advocates for adding a private label go-to-market plan to the way that you think about going to market as a startup company.
Right. And of course, before even getting to that point, they have to build the product and deliver it to the first batch of people that actually purchased it or ordered it.
Yep. So and of course, Darius, with that said, then that company has probably been under power for probably a couple of years in the hardware space before they've gotten to the point where they've been through crowdfunding, closed it, gotten to manufacturing, and got your first 100 or 1,000 pieces off the line to satisfy your early backers. That company's pretty far down the line.
So would that be a good candidate for Retail Accelerator?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We love companies that can say, look, we've put 50, 500, 1,000 products into the market. We've done it either independently or through a Kickstarter class campaign. And here's what our customers have said about our product. In other words, all that classic Steve Blank business model canvas, product market fit feedback is really fabulous. And that helps us kind of craft the message that we end up then taking to the mass retailers that are always looking for that next exciting thing to bring to their customers.
Okay. So my next question actually is kind of related to that because, and especially since you ran innovation for Best Buy for 4 years, what are your thoughts about the role of the innovation labs for the big retailers?
I think the innovation labs are good steps, but like any innovation program at retail, you can think about that as being a portfolio. In an innovation lab, and oftentimes those things are planted in Silicon Valley or somewhere else where there's a number of startups. They're a good component to how those big retailers are looking for innovation. They're great kind of intelligence points. Think about them as being scouts. And they're good for that, but they're far from sufficient.
Okay.
And I wasn't diving into what sufficiency means because that's you get into the what it takes to make a viable long-term innovation strategy at retail. That opens a whole nother can of how do you think about biz dev? How does that function intersect with core category merchants? How does it work with the online versus the physical businesses? How do you think about internal financing? How do you think about IT projects? How do you think about venture investing in the early stage companies you start? All those need to be considered when putting together kind of a retail innovation program.
Okay, great. Okay. So how do you, for Retail Accelerator, how do you actually select the companies for each batch? Now, my understanding is that you just finished the second batch or cohort or class. Mm-hmm. How do you call it?
Exactly, we did. We just finished getting through a portfolio day for class number 2, and we're on to now sourcing class number 3, which starts in January. And the selection process is first driven by what our retailers are looking for. So we've asked out loud, what categories do you care about? And it's interesting. The first cohort was really focused on smart home products. The second one turned out to be interestingly focused on innovative new food and beverage products. The third cohort is smart home plus kind of the broader consumer electronic space. And that kind of gives us kind of the sourcing thesis, if I could say it that way. And at that point in time, it's virtual and physical legwork. I mean, one of our partners is Fundable, and Fundable will reach out to, 500,000, million of their companies in their database. So we do some mass marketing. We reach out to all the early stage one accelerators, if I can name them that way. We reach out to their graduates to find interesting companies that fit the sourcing thesis. And eventually we reach out to, hundreds of companies. And then we start the live interviewing to kind of to sort through the, what are you doing? Where are you going? What's your portfolio look like? And eventually we end up selecting a class to put through the 12-week program. And
okay.
Beyond.
Great. And the class is remote, from what I understand. What I learned is that they don't actually have to physically go to Minneapolis.
No, they don't. I mean, one of our early hypotheses was, and Darius, I'm going to be clear, right? We're still learning how this is going to work. The accelerator itself is honing in on its own product market fit. And one of our early thesis behind that was, as the late stage accelerator that it is, the retail accelerator probably couldn't ask companies to pick up and move to a building and then be co-housed with a bunch of other startups. I mean, the companies are probably too large by the time we get them. It's no longer a founder with an idea. Oftentimes, we are seeing companies that are in round A financing and are scaling up and have venture funding behind them. They're not going to pick up and move to a location for support, and that was hypothesis number one. That led to observation number two, which is, because we don't require companies to pick up and move, our reach is no longer, the companies that surround Silicon Valley or any other geography. So we have companies that join from Taiwan to Estonia. And it's a wonderful thing to get to companies outside the boundaries of the U.S. and give them an opportunity to understand what it takes to win in the U.S. and do so in a way where they dial in virtually into classwork, and they only have to show up physically for the first time when we have our portfolio day with our big retailers.
Okay, so that's another important distinguishing factor, I think, is that typically an accelerator's portfolio day is from other investors, VCs, angel investors, to get more money so that they can do that. For you, it's actually doing demonstrations for actual customers.
Here's what I found on the web for us angel investors.
Excuse me. Siri just picked up my voice and decided to give an answer to something.
If she's giving better answers than I am, and you know what, I need to change jobs.
She is far from that. She's. This is amazing. I mean, excuse me. So
that's funny.
So you're actually you're putting the startups right in front of the customers.
That's exactly right. I mean, our portfolio day is in the scale of a lot of stage one accelerators is relatively intimate, in the sense that we invite a limited number of retailers to the event. We have portfolio presentations. We prep the companies the night before. We have nice icebreakers kind of with the retailers that are attending. And at the end of the presentations to all, we have individual sessions between every retailer attending and each startup company that presented. And that's not an idle introduction. That's how are we as a retailer best going to be able to serve you, the startup, and taking you to market? Through our online options, through our in-store options, and there's many variants on that theme, through our private label business, if that makes sense, through B2B instruments, if I as a retailer have that. There's a lot of different ways that a retailer can be useful for the startup company. And that's where you have that live conversation such that startup leaves each room with each retailer with here's the 3 ways I can follow up with that retailer. And that's just invaluable.
I agree. That's a holy grail for startups. So
and And I think, Darius, it's also the holy grail for the investors, right?
Of
Any
course.
investor in a company, the number one thing that they want to hear is that startup company is not just getting product market fit, but it's also got a chance at scaling up. Because frankly, without the scaling, the investment's not going to pay itself off. So in many ways, we provide the companies, the startups that we touch, the most important ingredient to the latter stage of their growth, which is retail traction.
Yes,
Yes.
that makes sense. So, um, talking about actually your next class, which is home automation, and since I actually have a little bit of experience in that, I started a home automation software company in early 90s. So, what do you
a little
see?
a little ahead of the curve, weren't you?
Yeah, yeah, that was a hard lesson we learned. So, um, somebody said being early is just as bad as being wrong. So I learned that lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
Now, what do you see as far as the technologies that are exciting for you in the home automation field? What are you going to be looking for in the next batch?
Well, I think what we're looking for is we're looking for companies that are taking different slants on home automation. Um, let me say it differently, right? If you look across the innovation landscape, there's a shocking number of the new startups that are actually in smart tech in some way, shape, or form. And it may be, Darius, a reason why that's true is you back up a little bit, right? When you think about the smart home revolution as it started as simple as you putting Wi-Fi routers in the home. Then you added, suddenly your phone and your TV started to talk to your router, and pretty soon you're adding security services or pick your favorite. And what's happened now is almost every product in the home is suddenly becoming smart. And you knew that was coming when you started to see things like your sprinkler systems became smart systems. Your phone, the the intelligence of the IoT ecosystem is seeping into almost every category in the home. Um, and because of that, right? I mean, it's not just security or even home automation anymore. You've now got all home health. You've got smart chronic care. You've got, I mentioned even irrigation systems, gardening systems are going smart. Almost everything you have in the home is going smart, and because of that, so many of the products that a retailer sells across categories are also going smart. It's a long way of saying is kind of what you define as home automation. If the bullseye of that was kind of security, and that was kind of the tip of the spear for home automation, the concentric rings around that are expanding really, really fast into new categories. And we're really looking for companies that are being innovative in these new categories.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we basically, when we were working on that project, we were focused on lighting, audiovisual, and security. And if a home had those, we would call it a smart home.
Absolutely. And, Darius, I go back to our first class, right? Um, two of our companies are going to market right now. You have, Trago that's doing smart water bottles and adding hydration, formulas to add to that offering. And you have another company that's offering smart safes, smart pistol boxes, smart cabinetry locks, et cetera. So my point being is so many of things in the home today that are not smart, if you fast forward 10 years ago, your definition of the smart home is going to be a lot broader than what you described it was, 5 or 10 years ago.
Right. Yeah. So, and then what do you think about the other companies, like big companies getting into the space as well, like, Apple with their HomeKit and, definitely Alexa from Amazon, I think is really pushing things to what could be with voice.
Yeah, couple of thoughts, right? One, HomeKit in many ways is more about protocol and standards adherence, which is a bit different than Alexa, which is all about a new interface type, right? I mean, if you think back 3, 4 years ago, the dominant theme in the smart home space was that cell phone that I carry with me is now my virtual remote control to every smart device in the home. The problem with that is practically, it doesn't work that way. And I'll give you, a live ammo example, right? I walk into my home and I want to turn on my lights. Well, if I have to pull out my cell phone, get past I fumble in the dark to get past my login screen. I bring up the app, click on the app, find the button that actually turns on my lights. I could have been through my house, turned on the lights, and be done with that a long time ago. And then add to that, some of the inefficiencies of controlling your lights through a kind of a very slow response speed kind of interface. And you go, well, maybe the cell phone isn't the end all be all for interfaces. I say that, Darius, just to set the stage for, isn't it a lot easier and a lot more natural to walk into home and say, Alexis, turn on my lights? And it just happens. So I think Alexa is more of a user experience interactive mode than it is kind of like HomeKit, which is more protocols and standards.
Okay, so Alexa or the voice interface sits on top of the standards and the back end that basically enables that.
I think that's right. It really doesn't matter whether you're talking, HomeKit, or you're talking about protocol communication issues like Zigbee and Z-Wave, or pick your favorite. That is a very different level in kind of the technology stack than voice services, which could sit on top of so many different devices in the home. In fact, one of the things we're seeing in the waves of startups now is so many of them now are building voice control interfaces into their core tech. And they're using it as being, you can switch it on and off with your phone, or you can talk to it. They're just two different interaction modes.
So how does the program actually work, the Retail Accelerator? When a company gets into the program, how much equity do you take? Do you help them financially? What are the specific things that founders of these companies should expect to get help on?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the terms for this are very different than early stage terms, right? Which are typically, you put up, a first stage accelerator will put in $50,000 to $100,000 and take 5 to 10% of the company, provide some mentors, provide some physical real estate, and they move on. We approach it as we take a little bit of equity. We take 2% or $100,000, whichever is less. And we do that in part because we have a kind of a broad range of companies at different financial stages and valuation stages. We also, as a primary term, once we take them to market, we act as their ongoing sales, marketing, and channel management team. So we get a percentage of COGS, of cost of goods, for the startup company for that ongoing service and relationship. So saying it really simply and differently, right? If you think about our accelerator, there's almost a phase A and a phase B. The phase A lasts all of 10, 12 weeks. Think about that being the graduate school, virtually delivered, webinar delivered, coach supported, 30 companies working with us to help these companies get ready for portfolio day. And then portfolio day is the break point between phase A and phase B. And for us, phase B goes on for years, where we continue to be the sales, marketing, and support organization that helps these companies grow with these big retailers. So for us, bringing a company into the accelerator is not kind of a one and done. It's kind of bringing it into the family. And once we're working with them, we're working with them for as long as the business relationship lasts. And in fact, oddly, Darius, interesting, since this model is just evolving, a number of our class 1 and class 2 companies are so interested in attending various classes for the class 3 program, either as refreshers or because we have new speakers showing up as part of that program. So there's a little bit like we're creating a community that's helping startups on an ongoing basis succeed at retail. And that's pretty dang exciting, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The scale of what it takes to build a company, get a product to market, get sales, and support through that. There's so many different steps to that sometimes I think like startups think about, okay, I need to give away 5% or 10% to get to this step. Well, there is a cost regardless of how you look at it. In this case, for example, the cost might be 5% and you might get some money to get started. But then how do you get in front of the large retailers, for example? What is the cost of that? How much do you need to give away to angel investors, or VCs to even get to that point? And then be prepared for success even. You have to look at the entire equation of what it takes to build a company, make it a successful business.
I think that's well said. It's interesting, this latter stage of a startup's life, call it the teenage years, after they've got out of a Techstars program, and before they're kind of an ongoing steady state business that's working with retail. There's this really clunky middle stage that we're trying to support, and you can argue it's the most critical stage in a company's life, and that's where they go from someone with an idea and a first product to someone that is scaling and has an ongoing business across the U.S. with major retail. And the folks in the UK, there's a gal named Sherry Coutu, Coutu, and she's in the UK, and she was asked by the UK government to answer the following question, and I'm oversimplifying it. Sherry, if you hear this, I apologize. I am way oversimplifying this. But she was asked the question basically is, why don't we, the UK, have a whole bunch of Googles and Amazons and Apples? What is it that's not creating as a country these kind of globe-straddling multinational companies that start as startup companies? And there's a report out there that's public that you can Google and find. And one of the conclusions of this was that the UK doesn't do nearly as good a job as the US does supporting what they call scale-ups. And these are these companies in that tweener stage between, after first stage accelerator and before they're a steady state growth company. And it's that same scale-up stage that we're trying to pour gas on here through our Retail Accelerator program.
Okay.
Stop. I got a little off topic, but that's it's an interesting digression because this notion of dealing with this stage in a startup company's lifespan is something that's not paid enough. We don't pay enough attention to as a culture and as a country. The UK has taken a swing at trying to do better at it, and my hats are off to them for doing so. And we're trying to do that as a business here in the US.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a very interesting concept. Typically, what I've seen is that that's the role of the investors and the advisors, the board of directors, whatever after they go through the accelerator and then actually start to get more meaningful funding, but nobody's really programming this
Right.
whole process, and that seems to be what you're doing.
That's right, and you're exactly right. In fact, if you look across to your point, if you think that pulling together a smart board as a startup founder is sufficient to solve what your retail traction issues are, I've never seen that. Because in reality, as every board member has an area of expertise, but as I said, even just for the next class that's cranking up here in a couple of weeks, we have 30 independent companies, Darius, teaching classes and then offering their services to the startup companies if they need them. And, it's hard to find that much expertise in any one small set of people within a startup company or within that company plus their board. The intent of this is to clobber that problem once and for all. In fact, a simple metaphor I use all the time is every startup company is like a puzzle. And depending on who the founders are, whether they're engineers or they're marketers or what their background was, they often are really good and they've nailed down 70, 80, 90% of the puzzle pieces that it takes to succeed as a startup company. The problem is the last 10 or 20% will kill you. And that's one of the reasons why startup companies fail at retail. And it's one of the things that we're trying to stop from happening by putting in the program that we have.
Yeah, this makes perfect sense. Now, once a company graduates from Retail Accelerator, what are the typical funding stages after that? Do they actually, you work with VCs and other type of funding sources to help them on that as well?
It's a good question. I think their answer to that is honestly, we're evolving. Darius, I think our early assumption was companies that got into the accelerator would have financial backers that were looking for nothing other than to write that next check after they heard that a Walmart or an Amazon or a Target is going to be taking them to market. What we have found is, surprisingly, is funding isn't always an issue, even at the stage that we're at now. So one of the things we're throwing into this next RX class that we haven't even advertised yet is we're going to be bringing in some hardware VCs to effectively present to the startup companies like a capability. So in other words, the next day it might have been packaging, logistics, supply chain, and call centers. The following day it might be, you know what, here's 3 VCs that have very different investment thesis, appetites, and approaches. Listen to them. Maybe there's a marriage there. So I think we're starting to sneak our way into connecting our startup companies to funding sources where initially we didn't think that would be that important of a role. Turns out it's still a role at the stage these companies are at.
Yes, I think it will probably definitely add another dimension to the program with something like that.
Yeah, the simple way for it to think about it, Darius, is you remember one of our key terms is our terms of the startup company are such that we get a small portion of their top line revenue for the support that we do as they succeed. So being really blunt about it, we're 100% lined up on their side of the negotiating table, and anything we can do to help these companies succeed benefits us. So we're constantly now adding new classes, new programs, new partners that help not just new classes, but even classes that have gone by be successful. And we make those assets and capabilities available to everyone that's gone through the program.
I really appreciate the feedback that you provided. I think the program is very interesting. It's good to distinguish it as a late stage product accelerator. Is there anything that you would like to provide as a parting comment?
I guess I'd say this, right? As kind of startup America, there's a lot we collectively as industry experts can do to help these early stage companies succeed, and it benefits everybody. And I think we at the Accelerator are doing our part to do so. I think, Darius, as you get the message out and broaden the net, I hope that through that work you'll touch a few companies we might have missed that would find this program really to be of value. Because honestly, we're here to help these startup founders and their companies succeed. And we've got to make all the business economics work for everybody involved. But it's really a program that's focused on, driving a new capability into the infrastructure that just doesn't exist today. And we're excited to be doing the work. We love it. We love our founders, and we think we're creating something new and exciting.